Welcome to the Dub Dive. We sift through some really compelling sources, articles, research, and pull out the key insights for you. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a collection of sources that draw some pretty provocative parallels between, well, the collapse of ancient Rome and the challenges modern America seems to be facing. But it doesn't stop there. They also pivot to offer these compelling pathways for survival and maybe even rebuilding. So, our mission today is really to unpack these historical echoes. We want to identify what the author of these sources calls survival codes and explore what these insights might actually mean for you as we all try to navigate this world of, well, constant change. We definitely found some thought provoking stuff in these sources. Hopefully, they spark a few insights for you too.
Yeah, and it's worth saying this source material, it isn't just, dry historical analysis. It's really framed as a kind of survival literature
Mm.
and even a practical blueprint for remembering sort of who we are and what we can do when those larger systems start to fray. So this deep dive hopefully helps connect those historical patterns to the bigger picture today. It's trying to guide us through a vision for resilience.
Okay, let's dig in then. The source material argues pretty forcefully that the fall of Rome wasn't like a single event. It was more of a slow, almost spiritual erosion. And maybe controversially, the authors argue America is facing similar systemic failures. They say it's glitching in real time. The tone in these sources is urgent. It's almost poetic sometimes. It feels like a stark warning.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating is how these sources argue that empires are generally built on this illusion, an illusion of permanence. History, though, doesn't really care about illusions. It remembers patterns. And the core idea here is how Rome's internal decay shows specific mirroring patterns of collapse,
Yeah.
patterns that the sources argue we can kind of observe today.
And some of those patterns really hit home, don't they? Let's start with wealth inequality. I mean, Rome's elite famously hoarded land, the latifundia, and that pushed out the middle class, leading to, well, serious unrest. You had figures like the Gracchi brothers trying to redistribute land, and tragically, they were assassinated for challenging the status quo. So it wasn't just economic, it fundamentally reshaped their society, bred injustice, disenfranchisement.
Yeah, and it set a really dangerous precedent for political violence down the line. And the sources draw a direct line from that to modern America. They point out how today the top 1% controls more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. We're seeing this shrinking middle class, burdened by debt, inflation, wages not keeping up. It really echoes Rome's economic disparity. The key insight seems to be that unchecked economic imbalance doesn't just create poverty, it actually corrodes the foundations of a stable society.
Hmm. And beyond the economists, the sources paint a pretty grim picture of Rome sliding into political chaos. What did that look like, and how does it echo today, especially this idea of eroding political norms?
Well, in Rome, the Senate basically normalized corruption and power grabs. Violence became part of the political process. You had mobs removing officials. Bribery was just how things worked. And the parallel drawn to America is, our current political polarization. The threats, the civil unrest, like the events at the Capitol, and this normalization of things like government shutdowns, using emergency powers, executive overreach, it all feels familiar. The sources actually say Rome's republic died not with a bang, but with a shrug, suggesting maybe America is in a similar state of kind of political apathy.
Right. So after the Republic fell apart, Rome shifts to an empire under Augustus. The illusion of democracy kind of stuck around, but the real power centralized. Senators became, well, puppets. And our sources argue America is going through a similar shift, with power getting more and more concentrated.
Exactly. And this shift, the sources detail, shows up in a few key ways. First, surveillance. Rome used informants, spies, to keep control. Today, we see mass data collection, facial recognition, predictive policing. The sources have this striking phrase: the digital coliseum is where algorithms replace emperors,
Wow.
meaning these huge, often unseen computations shaping our information, our choices, our interactions, they now wield this subtle but pervasive control, like emperors did, but digitally.
That's a chilling thought, how control evolves. And it wasn't just direct spying back then, was it? Rome was also a master of shaping public perception, right? And the sources see parallels to our media landscape.
Oh, definitely. Rome used coinage, monuments, state religion, anything to control the narrative,
Okay.
fight people, keep them calm. In America, we have the 247 media cycles, these algorithmic echo chambers reinforcing what we already believe, corporate-sponsored truth. The insight here is just how sophisticated propaganda has become. Information control is everything.
And the sources also bring up the militarization of internal forces. Rome's legions kept order inside the borders as well as outside.
Yeah, and this is mirrored, they say, in America where police forces look increasingly military. tanks, drones, riot gear deployed in civilian situations. The idea presented is that when the illusion of internal peace starts to crack, the empire turns its weapons inward.
Okay, another parallel the source is drawn, this one might be a bit controversial, compares Rome's use of curfews and martial law during unrest to modern lockdowns.
Yes. The sources interpret these not just as public health measures, but potentially as a kind of ritual of control,
Yeah.
designed perhaps to teach isolation, compliance, economic dependence. Remember Rome's bread and circuses to pacify people? The sources suggest America uses things like stimulus checks and streaming services in a similar way. Distraction becomes the new opiate, ensuring compliance through comfort and dependence. That's the argument presented.
Okay, shifting gears to economics again. Rome's economy eventually collapsed. Debt, inflation, overexpansion, currency debasement, supply chain breakdowns, the labor crisis with reliance on slaves, it all added up.
And the parallels drawn to America are pretty stark. Trillions in national debt, printing huge amounts of money, inflation eating away at savings and wages, global supply chain fragility that recent events really exposed. Plus, the sources suggest this reliance on underpaid workers, gig labor, further destabilizes the economic base. The deep insight here, I think, is that economic stability isn't just about having wealth. It's about the integrity of the system itself, which can basically unravel from the inside because of its own excesses.
It sounds like the problems weren't just internal, though. The sources point to Rome's military spending and overextension, too. How does that connect to now?
Well, Rome's military got bloated, stretched too thin, relied more and more on mercenaries. It faced rebellions from within and pressure from barbarians outside. The parallel is America's global reach, over 800 military bases worldwide, trillions spent on defense while infrastructure at home crumbles. Veteran burnout, seemingly endless proxy wars. The core idea is that an empire stretching itself too thin militarily often ends up neglecting its own core.
And this overextension, the sources suggest, kind of paves the way for what they call the rise of outsiders.
Right.
Rome, empowering various barbarian groups through trade and migration, eventually played a part in its decline, right?
Exactly. And today, the sources parallel this with the rise of China, India, the BRICS nations. They're challenging America's dominance, but often through strategic realignment, not necessarily direct war. The argument isn't just that empires fall because they're attacked. Often they fall because they get outpaced, outmaneuvered by emerging powers who learn from their weaknesses.
Then there's cultural decay, institutional failure. Rome's last century saw, decadence, distraction, disillusionment, public virtue faded, private indulgence took over, religion got politicized.
And the sources argue that in America, consumerism oft defines identity. Social media replaces real community. Political tribalism shreds shared values. Institutions like a gridlocked Congress, a contentious Supreme Court, the scrutiny of police, underfunded schools, they mirror how Rome's institutions became tools of oppression. And all that leads to this profound erosion of public trust.
Which leads, finally, to the collapse of civic identity itself. Romans' belief in the res publica, the public thing, it just fractured. Inequality, corruption, citizenship lost its meaning.
And today, the sources suggest, political identity often trumps national identity. Social media tribes replace civic engagement. Misinformation erodes any sense of shared reality. The core insight seems to be, when people stop believing the system is legitimate, they stop participating in a meaningful way. And that's when a democracy really starts to wither.
Okay, so we've laid out these pretty chilling parallels. The diagnosis, it's heavy stuff. But the sources don't just leave us there, lost in the ruins. They pivot. They move directly into this practical guide for resilience, both personal and collective. They call it Reclaiming the Inner Empire. It's presented as a real blueprint for action.
And this really raises the crucial question, doesn't it? If empires fall from within, how do we as individuals build resilience? The source introduces these powerful concepts, suggesting resilience isn't just about stocking up on supplies, it's about cultivating an inner defense system. They call them security system spirits, and building daily life around ritual infrastructure. It's like creating a personal spiritual fortress against the breakdown.
Right, an inner defense.
Yeah.
And the material outlines key steps for that. Studying these patterns of collapse we just talked about, reclaiming ancestral skills. Growing your own food, building community, resisting what they call rituals of control, like certain kinds of digital propaganda, and preparing for scarcity. It's all about building autonomy.
Precisely. And the source really dives into this idea of spiritual resistance. It sees collapse not just as political, but as an energetic event. So from that angle, these spiritual firewalls become Practices shielding you from psychological warfare, cultural erasure, digital manipulation. The core idea is that your inner state, your energy, is actually your most critical resource.
And they get specific about practices for building this vibrational armor, as they call it. Things like physical cleansing, smoke baths, salt baths, but also mental and spiritual disciplines like journaling or sigil casting.
Which is basically creating symbols for intention.
Exactly, and prayer coding, which sounds like structured affirmations to program intentions. They also mention sound medicine using frequencies for healing. It's all aimed at fortifying your inner self against those external pressures.
So for you, the listener, the daily practices they suggest are pretty concrete. Things like cleanse daily, maybe with smoke, salt baths, affirmations. Protect your energetic frequency limit, fear-based media. Maybe use protective symbols if that resonates. Connect to ancestral memory call names. Study family rituals. Create sacred space at home. And practice energetic discernment. Learn to feel the difference between what resonates and what feels like manipulation.
Okay, next up is something they call collapse cuisine, which is about feeding the spirit, not just the body. Food, they argue, is memory, it's medicine, it's ritual. The core insight here seems to be that real resilience means knowing how to turn roots into remedies, scraps into sustenance, and maybe even scarcity into ceremony. It's about remembering skills and connections that empire might have tried to erase.
That's right. Rome's food crisis partly came from relying on imports that failed. The sources argue America's system monoculture, global supply chains, is similarly fragile. So collapse cuisine isn't just survival recipes. It's about reviving ancestral foodways, foraging wild edibles, preserving food through drying, fermenting, smoking, and cooking with intention, with prayer, with rhythm. It turns a basic need into, well, a spiritual practice.
And they give some practical examples of these survival recipes. Things like bone broth with wild herbs, ash cakes, which is a simple historical staple made from cornmeal or flour cooked in ashes, pemmican, that high-calorie mix of dried meat, fat, and berries, and fermented vegetables for gut health and storage.
Yeah, but the deeper point is food becoming ceremony again. Blessing ingredients, maybe eating in silence sometimes to honor ancestors, sharing food freely as an act of rebellion against the scarcity mindset. Your collapsed kitchen, the sources suggest, can become a kind of sacred space, like a temple.
Interesting. And then there are prophetic frequencies, voices that break the spell. This sounds intriguing.
It is. The sources describe sound itself as a form of liberation. They suggest these prophetic frequencies are specific vibrations that can restore what empire corrupted. And they might arrive through ancestral memory, spoken word performance, even journal entries.
So the idea is that the empire fears what it can't program.
Exactly. It fears these frequencies because you can't really monetize them or mute them easily. And part of this involves deprogramming language, reframing terms, like instead of crisis, think ritual initiation. Instead of lockdown, maybe frequency filter. Misinformation could be seen as truth beyond empire's algorithm. They call this survival speech, a way to reclaim meaning in a world where language gets distorted.
And they encourage prophetic writing, spoken word, using visionary metaphors, ancestral voices, scriptural rhythms, urging the listener to embody this kind of prophetic speech, to speak in a way that shakes the algorithm, transmits truths that are maybe pre-colonial, post-digital.
Yeah, it's about finding a voice that resonates deeper than the noise.
Okay, so we've dissected the problems, the parallels, the inner work for resilience. But the sources, as you said, don't stop there. This next part gets really compelling, how they propose we actually design a new world, moving from the ashes to, well, architecture.
Right. In connecting this to the bigger picture, the text basically says collapse isn't just an end, it's a clearing. It's an opportunity to build new systems, but rooted in intention, memory, spiritual code, not just rebuilding the same old structures that failed.
Yes.
Think about Rome's survivors. They didn't try to recreate the Senate. They built gardens, formed tribes, adapted.
They did, and the sources actually list survival principles from Rome's collapse that feel relevant now. Don't wait for rescue, barter is power, grow something, protect your mind, preserve memory, build spiritual armor, form tribes.
And central to this whole blueprint for rebirth are these 9 core principles the source calls the supreme mathematics. What's really profound here isn't just the numbers themselves, but this radical idea that personal spiritual principles can become the actual architecture for rebuilding society, turning individual transformation into, like, collective infrastructure.
Okay, walk us through them. Knowledge is number one.
Yeah, knowledge is the foundation. Knowing truth, history, the land, yourself. 2 is wisdom. How you apply that knowledge, how you move, speak, teach, protect.
3 is understanding, clarity. the blueprint, the vision of what needs building.
4 is culture or freedom. That's the rhythm, the rituals, language, food that break the chains of empire.
5 is power or refinement, sharpening your tools, your rituals, your voice. 6 is equality balance, recognizing every role matters. Healer, grower, storyteller.
7 is God recognizing the divine within, the source code, the frequency guiding the rebuilding. 8 is build or destroy the choice in every action. Are you building a garden or a prison? Illusion or community?
And 9 is born the manifestation, the new world, new systems that actually serve the spirit.
And finally, 0 is the cipher. The full cycle, the ecosystem, the community holding it all. The sources present these as a kind of survival sequencing, an order for creation.
Wow, that's a whole system. And beyond the numbers, there's language too, the supreme alphabets.
Yes. The sources present individual letters, almost like spells or codes. Ways to speak when language itself is corrupted or erased. Each letter gets a deeper meaning, like A for Allah, the source, B for Bur or born, manifesting, C for clarity, D for divine, sacredness, and so on. It's about encoding divinity directly into how you communicate.
Okay, this is leading somewhere really interesting, embodied reclamation. The idea that after systems collapse, your body becomes the map, the system itself. This isn't just survival. It's like a total reclaiming of your being. The new system isn't some external government.
No, it's the survivor who walks as living prophecy. That's the idea. It means physical embodiment. Your breath is the new constitution. Your feet are the parliament, voting for sovereignty with every step. Your hands are the ministry planting, writing, drumming, healing. Your voice becomes spiritual, speaking in these sigils, these frequencies. Your heart is the rhythm keeper, designing by feeling. They call it embodied governance. You're not voting, you're vibrating.
And this embodiment connects back to the supreme mathematics.
Directly. Knowledge in the crown, wisdom in the throat, understanding in the third eye, culture freedom in the heart, power refinement in the solar plexus, equality in the sacral, God in the root, build destroy through the limbs, born through the breath, and the cipher is your whole energetic field.
And it also involves reclaiming time itself, getting off the external clock.
Exactly. Not relying on imposed schedules, but connecting to seasonal rhythms, ancestral rhythms, sacred rhythms. Your body, the sources say, becomes the clock, the calendar, the archive of authentic time.
So the ultimate goal here seems to be building ritual infrastructure. Functional systems rooted in sacred intention, designed to actually outlast collapse. Unlike Rome's rigid hard systems that just got corrupt and failed.
Right. And these ritual infrastructures could look like many things. Water rituals, rain harvesting, blessing water as foundational acts. Food systems based on growing medicine, sharing meals as community rituals. Education through rhythm, history, storytelling. Health systems using healing circles. Governance maybe through ritual councils, making decisions through silence, dialogue, prayer, not just politics. And each principle of the supreme mathematics, each letter of the supreme alphabets, functions as a building block, encoding divinity into the system's language right from the start.
And just briefly, for those interested in deeper layers, the sources also touch on scriptural echoes. They mention Daniel's prophecy about the fall of a fourth kingdom, and also Surah al-Rum from the Qur'an about Roman defeat and victory.
Yeah, both emphasizing the impermanence of empires, but suggesting that a divine rhythm endures through it all. It adds another dimension to this cyclical view of history.
Wow, okay. This deep dive, it's really laid bare some profound parallels, hasn't it, between Rome's fall and today's challenges. But it also presents this incredibly proactive, almost sacred vision for what could come next. The sources really remind us that collapse isn't just destruction, it can be a clearing. And you, the listener, are kind of invited to be an architect of what follows.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating, I think, is the emphasis on your internal tempest.
Yeah.
Your rituals, your community, your memory. These are presented as the real security systems that can actually outlast any empire. Survival isn't passive hoarding, it's active transformation. It's about rebuilding meaning, not just buildings.
So here's a thought to leave you with, building on these sources. If empires fall when people forget what freedom really feels like, when they trade it for comfort, then what does remembering, truly remembering our inherent power, our own rhythm, what does that unleash in us and in the world around us?
Maybe the true reboot isn't digital after all. Maybe it's spiritual, found in these deep patterns of history and maybe, just maybe, in the wisdom that's already encoded inside your own being. What will you choose to build from the ashes?